This change is one of the biggest change, and I think prevailing wage is the single best way for economic development. It levels the playing field.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Updates on the enforcement of the Davis-Bacon Act. That is when you put it like that, it doesn't sound super sexy, but it is actually really sexy because the upshot, like I said earlier, is that construction workers are going to make higher wages on federal construction sites. That's
right,
very
absolutely,
important.
Absolutely.
And we're really excited about that. We were really excited when this rule change was announced, and so we have wanted for a couple of weeks to get on some folks from the Building Trades Union, and we have that this morning. We have Steve Stutz, who is former president of the local union of operating engineers over in Muscle Shoals. He is also former international representative for the union, and I believe is currently the president of the Shoals Democrats. Is that right? Steve? I don't know if he can hear me. Our other guest that we have, though, is Sean Paul Kimball. He is the president and business manager for the Iron Workers Local 704 in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and is president of the Building Trades Council in the area. Sean Paul, really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for having me on. It's an honor.
Absolutely. And Steve, are you there now?
I don't know. I think Steve's connection may be bad. Not sure what's going on there.
Okay. Well, let's start off with talking about while we wait for Steve to connect. Sean, you have had issues with Davis-Bacon in the past, and so can you just talk to us about the Davis-Bacon Act? What is it like? What does it do on federal construction sites that makes it that makes it such an important piece of legislation to unions like yours in the building trades?
Well, thank you. The Davis-Bacon Act was enacted in 1931 by, oddly enough, two Republicans. It was U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania, James John Davis, and a U.S. Rep from New York, Robert Bacon. And I think it was Senator Davis had a job in his district where they brought up a large amount of African Americans to a project in Pennsylvania. I think it might have been at a U.S. steel mill, and they were working these people 14 hours a day, paying substandard wages, and it was just awful. So he said, there should be area standards on federally funded public projects, and it should be the prevailing rate of that area. So, oddly enough, living wage in 1931, let's fast forward, it worked great. The greatest generation, union density was at its all-time high. A family could work 40 hours a week and not worry about losing their house or, didn't have to work 3 jobs. Wages weren't suppressed. 1980, Reagan comes along and he takes a lot of, things out of it. And now we're looking at a labor shortage right now because, for years, contractors on the non-union side mostly have suppressed wages so bad that, in right-to-work states like we're in Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, the wages are suppressed so bad you cannot get young people to go into a trade. So, federally, and it just makes sense. These are tax dollars. These are not private funds. These are not, Amazon didn't decide to throw a bunch of money in. Elon Musk is not funding this. These are federal dollars. So, it's what's wrong with paying the workers a living wage with benefits, and what this is going to do is this is going to bring it up. It's an 800-page document. So prevailing wage has always been, the lifeblood, not only for union, but non-union workers. It should level the playing field. And for this craft, you get this wage.
Right. And so, one of the issues that you told me about in the last, 40 years, right? There was an enforcement regime of the Davis-Bacon Act from 1930 to kind of 1980, and then basically, like everything else in American society, it went wrong in 1980. And we'll leave it to the listeners to figure out what exactly happened in 1980, but it went wrong in 1980, and they began calculating prevailing wage differently in 1980, and the upshot of that is that it lowered construction workers' wages. How have they been calculating prevailing wage for the last 40 years?
Well, since 1980, they used a formula where you had to have at least 50% of the workers in the area surveyed had to make this certain wage. Well, now they've reversed that and brought it back down to 30%. 50% is hard to achieve in right-to-work states where, there's a super majority. Like you said, we'll let the listeners figure that out. But, I mean, so they've reversed that back to 30%. And I'm not going to get off in the weeds too much with that, but that will help in itself. Another thing they did is there's misclassification is so rampant, and it's just like any law that is enacted, enforcement of that law, So now it's my understanding and what I've read and the industry experts that I've talked to, there's going to be, the general contractor is going to be held more liable. So let's say contractor A goes out there and hires a bunch of laborers to perform, whether it's ironwork, pipe fitting, operator, whatever, and pays those lower wages, instead of paying them the classification that they should be at. So there's going to be more enforcement, and it's going to raise, both rural areas and in the city, like, in the city of Chattanooga, Chickamauga Lock, they had to do what's called a rehabilitation program on that. So we have not prevailed in the heavy, in Davis-Bacon for years. So first thing that the contractor does is come in and hit us with a concession because, there was no. So even though we signed a project labor agreement on that job, we still had to take a concession on wages in order to get that job because that job didn't hit the magic, window where it's surveyed and everything.
And the and one of the ways, additionally, you mentioned that 50% threshold, and now it's down to 30%, which is going to benefit the workers, right? If you only have to have 30% of the people making a wage this high, and then that's the floor for federal construction projects, as opposed to 50%, right? You can imagine how how that's going to increase wages on federal construction sites. But you also said something about a survey every 7 years, and how if you didn't have workers in the year that they happened to do that survey, then your prevailing wage could actually go down to not applicable, and it would be the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour.
Right. And I think you're exactly right. And I think they changed that in 2022. I think it's $16. I'm not sure, but you're exactly right. And, there's a lot of things got to line up, for the one, there has to be a project in either heavy highway construction or building. And then you have to have contractors, one putting in for the survey for those projects. And there's a lot to do. And when you send the survey in, if a contractor sends it in, then it's pretty much gold. Nobody questions it. But if the local union sends it in, which we do on behalf of our contractors, I personally, when a survey comes up in our jurisdiction, whether it's in the Chattanooga area, Northeast Alabama, or Northwest Georgia, which is our jurisdiction, I sit down, I get with the contractors and find out who was working on that. And they always call the contractors. They don't always take our word for it. But with those surveys in there, whether union or non-union, you should be making a living wage. And,
right. Absolutely. And that's the thing about, you mentioned that about when it's public dollars, we should be investing in public benefits, and it is beneficial to the public for the people building our infrastructure to not be in poverty. You know?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
just for the moral thing of it, obviously, you know, I mean, if we're spending money on it as a government, then, you know, we should be putting our values into that. And that's really kind of even outside of any other economic calculations for me anyway. And I know that I'm not, you know, that's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, but when we're spending money as a government, we really should be injecting our values into it and setting the floor for the private sector. But even outside of that, maybe you don't care about, you know, workers not being in poverty. Like maybe that's not, you know, that's not something you care about. It's beneficial for the community when these workers have spending money. Right. It's beneficial for local restaurants, mom and pop, entertainment things, local grocery stores. You know, because the value is going to be created one way or another. Right? That's the thing that people need to understand, is that these workers are going to create this value, and the only question is it going to go into the community via these workers, or is it going to be suctioned out and go into the bank account of some wealthy person, wealthy executive in New York or DC, right? That's the question.
Right, the ones that benefit when the interest rate goes to 8% and the workers are trying to buy a car or a house or anything. Mm-hmm. You're exactly right. You could not, and I've jotted me down a note to talk about that. That's a perfect segue in the Chattanooga area building trades with Volkswagen. Came to Chattanooga. We were trying to get a local hire ordinance in the city of Chattanooga, much like, you know, Davis-Bacon, that, you know, if any work's provided or performed by, you know, Chattanooga area tax dollars, then, you know, there ought to be Chattanooga area workers working on that. So we hired an economist from UTC, University of Tennessee in Chattanooga, the Chattanooga area building trades, did do a study on if a local resident worker, now we're talking local resident, I think it was 45 to 50 miles from downtown Chattanooga, because Chattanooga borders Alabama and Georgia too. But, you know, a local resident of Chattanooga proper earns $1. That dollar turns over 7 times in just what you were talking about, the mom and pop. I mean, I live in about as rural Northwest Georgia as you can get, 30 minutes from Chattanooga. And if my sons want to go to Dick's Sporting Goods, or my wife wants to go to Ulta, we go to Chattanooga. You know, we love it here, but we don't mind commuting. So we spend a lot of our tax base in Chattanooga. If a non-resident of Chattanooga comes in for a project, that dollar just turns over 1.5 times. So, I mean, it just makes sense. Back to what, you know, Senator Davis said, and that's what he was worried about, was, you know, workers coming in from out of the area making substandard wages. And I mean, I could go on and on about the horror stories about Volkswagen and, you know, them just the treatment of the non-union workers out there, but we'll say that for another day. But you're exactly right. I mean, you know, it's not like this is privately funded. This is public tax dollars. And, you know, if the Republicans, Democrats, Independent, you know, they're going to sit here and say we're physically conservative. Well, be physically conservative with spending federal tax dollars and putting it in the workers' pockets where they can go out and they can live like middle class people used to live. I mean, I get pretty fired up about this because, you know, 30 years, I'll have 30 years of trade next year. And it's, you know, it's my passion to, you know, get more people in the trades and watch them retire with dignity. I mean, when you're talking to a young person in the apprenticeship, and I did this, I asked him, I said, what's your dream? Now, where do you see yourself in 20 years? And that young man looked me in the face and he said, I just want my own piece of grass to mow. You know, and I never had to experience that because my mom was a teacher in the state of Alabama, had a great teacher's retirement. And, you know, I think she was in 3 unions, the AEA, the NEA, then the one for the principals, administrators, then my dad. I'm a 3rd generation union iron worker. So, you know, I was fortunate to grow up in a middle class household. But, you know, why shouldn't that individual have the right to a living wage if he's willing to work for it? I mean, you know, we're not giving anything away. We're just, like you said, you know, we want to put a little bit in the pocket of the people who's building it. You know,
Right.
there's fixing to be a whole generation. It's going to be the generation of infrastructure because we've waited so long to let our power grid, you know, the demand for power and everything has waited so long. So now, you know, we have to build an extreme amount. So it's going to be, you know, a generation of infrastructure. So it's going to be, you know, this change is one of the biggest change. And, you know, I think prevailing wage is the single best way for economic development. You know, it levels the playing field.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
I was going to just chime in and say that exact same thing, that, you know, politicians like to talk about economic development and, you know, they have their own definitions of that. But there's a way to do economic development from the bottom up that actually supports the working people who are doing the vital work in our community that we all depend on. And so I really appreciate that. And, you know, shout out to the building trades unions for advocating for your members and fighting for your members and fighting on this issue and the persistence on this issue, because, you know, not every worker has folks out there fighting for them, as you talked about with the non-union contractors and the way those folks are treated. So yeah, just shout out to the building trades for all your work on this issue. And I so agree. This is a economic development tool that we should be using from not just the federal level, but to the local and the state level too. And so really appreciate your work on the local hire, you know, and fighting for that in Chattanooga. And I think, again, that's something that communities across the state of Alabama can learn from as well.
And, you know, it's also, in addition to everything else that we've mentioned, when you've got the trade unions on there, the union contractors on these construction projects, as opposed to non-union contractors who underpay their workers, have unsafe working conditions, and who don't train them as much, right? I mean, this is something that the ABC, the Associated Builders and Contractors, the big non-union construction lobby, that they want to do. They want to eliminate the skilled tradesmen. They want to train their employees to the job, to only be able to do a job. And then that takes away some of their power. Whereas the building trades unions, each one of those has the equivalent of a college degree, that amount of education, 3 to 5 years, depending on the union, hundreds of hours of classroom education, tests, studying, on-the-job training, and free of charge to the apprentice. Generally speaking, a couple of them you have to pay for your books. Free of charge to the apprentice. Free of charge to the government. The government doesn't fund any of these trade union apprenticeship programs. It all comes from the unions. And so that's another thing, that when you have these really skilled tradesmen who have gone through a college degree worth of education about how to be an iron worker, you know, how to be an operating engineer, that's going to, you know, the quality of your project is going to be different. And that is actually why Toyota Mazda has a project labor agreement for the factory that they're building right here in Huntsville. They have a project labor agreement with the trade unions because even though they don't want unions in their factories, they know that the trade unions are going to give them a better product. And they signed a project labor agreement despite our governor traveling to Japan to try to convince their executives not to sign a project labor agreement. You know, I mean, really, really wild stuff. But, you know, Steve, I wanted to see if Brother Stutz, if you are if you've gotten everything worked out with your audio, and if you have anything to say about what we've been talking about so far. I'm not sure what's going on. Is he muted?
Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. I think we've just had a connection issue going on. I know he did rejoin, so we'll see. Maybe that will help.
Okay. Yeah. Well.
So yeah, just let us know, Steve, when you're there.
Yeah. Feel free to just go ahead and
jump
pipe
in.
Yeah. Yeah. And so yeah, I don't know, Sean, Paul, if you had anything else on you know what I was talking about there about the quality.
Yeah, I do. the apprenticeship is something that's near and dear to my heart. Everybody doesn't come in through the apprenticeship. We have a probationary program that used to be the old permit program. It doesn't matter how you get to us at the iron workers. When you get here, we want you to retire here. We don't want you to work one project. But to your point about the apprenticeships, I was talking to a senator. Tennessee AFL has labor on the Hill, and then they invite all the senators and House reps to come over. So I was the gentleman was walking to me, and he's a Republican. I thought, how about but try to have an open mind. So we were talking, and I explained to him that the apprenticeships you were referencing are paid for by our members. He said, "Oh, y'all get grants." Or I said, No, we don't get any grants. You and your buddies cut all that out. I said, we're funded, and the smaller local you are, the more you have to put in. And that's, money our members put in to train. And we have to train to the industry standards, or our contractors aren't going to be with us. So he said that's something he's going to take back to the chamber and the ABC and the, AGC and tell them, you always gripe about how much more they cost. He says, but they train their own members. There is no. So again, back to, the phrase they like is being physically conservative. If we're paying for our own, and I told him the horror stories about going in behind contractors at Volkswagen, which, out of $1 billion, I think taxes were $800 million to build Volkswagen. So we had to do work twice. So they would give the bid out, lowest and most responsible. It's always lowest, never the most responsible bid. And then, fast forward, one of our signatory contractors goes in there and redoes the work. So there's no value in the race to the bottom on the lowest bid.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important too. The fact that these mistakes happen and these issues come up, and you have the safety problems, and so sometimes you get what you pay for when you're just strictly looking at the lowest bidder, and that's why responsible bidder ordinances are important, and project labor agreements, and so this is I've appreciated this conversation, because like you said at the beginning, Jacob, I know you may just glance at the headline of improvements to the Davis-Bacon Act. You're like, what the hell does that mean? But the idea of working people in your community being treated better and paid better is really something that uplifts the entire community. So that's huge, and I think we just got to keep fighting for it, at every level and in every community, and it's an opportunity for labor to work together with each other, right? All the building trades working together, and other unions working with the building trades and with the community. We all come together to support this, because it's a no-brainer kind of policy. If we can help people, if we can help the people who are helping us, that's what we need to do. So, I really appreciate it.
Sorry, I didn't know if Sean Paul was going to start. We'll try. We'll go to Steve one more time. See if he is Steve still in the Zoom.
Steve is not in the Zoom. No.
Man.
No, so sorry. Hate that. We'll have to follow up with Steve and see if we can get him back on next week or something.
Yeah, he. Like I said, he was the president of the local building trades union and of the local. Union of Operating Engineers, and he told me that he's got a bunch of stories about Davis-Bacon enforcement on Redstone Arsenal.
Oh, wow.
And how it's been so difficult to get a good prevailing wage, even on Redstone Arsenal. And
isn't that a shame?
Yeah.
I mean, such a huge piece of the economy here in North Alabama, and again, the public's purchasing power should be used to uplift the public.
Yeah,
it seems so basic, and it should be basic, and I personally have been very critical of the Biden administration on a lot of issues, including labor issues, and there's a lot of areas where I have disagreement, and Jacob and I, we can talk about that, as we do nearly every week, but this is a big issue, and this is big for the building trades, and so again, I think the building trades have done a great job advocating for their members, and it's good to see this win. And like I said, let's keep this momentum going into the local and state level and see how we can broaden the impact.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, we secured a project labor agreement with NAS Construction at over there at Air Force Base in Tullahoma, Tennessee. And now the Air Force has seen the fruits of our labor with that project labor agreement. So what we're doing is we have redone that contract to allow NAS to go out and bid even more work within that Air Force Base with all the money coming from the federal government for, military spending and everything. As well as TVA. I mean, the TVA Act's been using building construction trades, and it works. I mean, it's the gold standard, and safety, and no return to service issues or a bare minimum. And so it works. It's just do you want to put money in the pocket of the workers to help stimulate the economy, or do you want to put it in the pockets of the contractors so they can put it up there in their funds that we don't know what's going on with, just like you said, Jacob.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Sean Paul Kimball, President Business Manager of the Iron Workers Local 704 in Chattanooga, President of the Building Trades Council over there. Really appreciate you taking the time with us this morning. Is there anything else that you wanted to say signing off?
There is. There's one quote, and it's one of my favorite quotes ever. And he was a Martin, I cannot pronounce his name, Niemoller. He was a Lutheran pastor. He immigrated from Germany, and his quote is, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came out for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." And that was Martin Niemoller, I believe it was his name. But that's one of my favorite quotes, especially as I get older. I appreciate you, y'all bringing this to light. I mean, we have to tell the story of all workers, and it's just, whether you're in a union or not a union, I will tell you this much, united we bargain, divided we beg. And, that's just the quote that's out there. And I appreciate y'all having this platform. I encourage everybody to support this because, we're not lying here. We're not, telling anything that's not true. I mean, if you don't believe workers to live, deserve a livable wage, then, I can't talk to you much more about anything past that. So
really pretty fundamental
I appreciate
disagreement.
y'all having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And before you go, I wanted to you mentioned quote. I love that's one of my favorite quotes as well.
Right.
And it's worth quoting the first part of it, like you did. A lot of people don't quote the first part, but it's worth it's worth knowing how it starts actually. But speaking of quotes, the ABC, which you're a big fan of the ABC, I'm sure, the Associated Builders and Contractors. When this came out, they released a press release, and one of their quotes was, "This is yet another Biden administration handout to organize labor on the backs of taxpayers, small businesses, and the free market."
Yeah,
That's just gross.
That's ridiculous. Now, that's their national, but I've talked to a lot of different people, mostly north of the Mason-Dixon line, where, that's not right to work. And the ABC, sometimes our contractors and our, business agents and managers and people from international go to these meetings. They told me that the ABC has admitted that they have suppressed wages on federal projects so long that now they can't find anybody to work the projects. I mean, there's a craftsperson shortage all over the country right now. So, they say that on the national level, but, you dive into the weeds, they're hurting too. Their contractors are trying to find people too. But yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of them.
All right, brother. Well, hey, we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. It was great.
Yes, sir.
Hey, thank y'all, brothers. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that was great. I always enjoy talking to the building trades and hearing about their issues. And, again, the public purchasing power to me is one of those pieces of leverage where we as community members, we as labor union members, we as working people,
I was on there the whole time. Stevie Stutz didn't get on there.
we can really get together as, as a broader community and lift people's wages. And it's not a handout by any means. It's, yeah, where do you want the money to go? I want it to go to the working people and see where that goes.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.